Do you want the state government to sell assets, to give to ask for investment in long-term leases on things like the Port of Gladstone and Port of Townsville? What do you make of the budget that Tim Nicholls handed down today? We've got lots more analysis coming your way next. But give me a call, 1300 222 612. Love to hear your thoughts.
Well, the federal budget has been delivered and the impacts are still being debated. One question that arose is why are pensioners being hit in their concession rates? Why, at a state level, are we planning to sell assets after the Queensland budget? Is it that the age of entitlement is over in Queensland as well? Well, tomorrow, Queensland Treasurer Tim Nicholls is my guest.
Steve Austin, tomorrow morning from 8:30 on 612 ABC Brisbane.
ABC Local Radio, Queensland.
7:10, I'm Rebecca Livingston. This is why Treasurer Tim Nicholls wants to sell $33 billion worth of publicly owned assets.
As everyone should be aware by now, we were left with a situation where debt was heading towards and will hit $80 billion. We've lost our AAA credit rating, and that means we can't invest in the schools, the hospitals and the infrastructure that we know we're going to need in the future. For 2 months, we consulted Queenslanders. I travelled over 19,000 kilometres, attended more than 27 community and civic leaders forums. We engaged with over 70,000 Queenslanders about what we needed to do to pay down that debt so that we could have the funds that we need to invest in those schools and deliver the infrastructure that a growing state will need. Now, we know that some of the choices that we're going to make will not be popular with everyone, but people will know that we have made those choices, that there is a plan and that we can fund those schools and that vital infrastructure into the future. And that's why we're doing this. That's why I've spent, as I say, the last 2 months crisscrossing Queensland, talking to Queenslanders about the problem we face.
But did people say to you, sell this 99-year lease, that? What's the reason for the different modes of privatisation?
Well, in fact, the research showed that nearly 46% of submissions on the Strong Choices website mostly chose selling or leasing assets, and that compares to 28% who mostly supported increasing taxes and 18% who mostly supported cutting services.
That's the Treasurer, Tim Nicholls, speaking to the ABC's Tim Cox this afternoon. So what happens when you privatise a port? The Queensland Government will offer 99-year leases on the Townsville and Gladstone ports. So what will the consequences be for Queensland? Peter Van-Duyn is a maritime specialist at Victoria University. Evening, Peter.
Good evening, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And I'm curious to know, you've got some examples of government-owned ports that have been sold. Where were they, and what happened in the aftermath?
After the Thatcher government in the UK, quite a number of ports were privatised there, and much to the detriment of the community. What happened, as you know, when something is owned by a private enterprise, they obviously try to maximise their return on investment. So there's less money available for development, and consequently, the ports were when demand was growing, in this case was a lot of containerisation. Demand was growing. They weren't able to handle it because they hadn't caught up with development. So a lot of the business was lost to ports in Europe, and it's very hard once you lose business to get business back. So that was one example. The issue is when you do put ports, which ports are in a monopoly position. Most ports are. You've got not much, no other choice to go. If you want to load coal in Gladstone, well, you have to go to one of the gold berths there. So the issue is that private enterprise does what they wants to sweat the assets, and there's not much opportunity for business development, and a port should act as a business development role for its what they call it hinterland. So in my view, saying like the prime example is the Port of Brisbane. They used to have a port education centre, and
the Port of Brisbane was privatised in 2010.
Yeah, 2010, and about 6 months later, it was the education centre was closed. So issues like that, and for ports like Port of Rotterdam or Hamburg or Antwerp, large ports, they are owned by either the city or the provinces or the state, or by the federal government, and they invest a lot of money. Like the Port of Rotterdam has a multi-million-dollar visitor centre, and it even rates a mention on TripAdvisor. So it's it's things like that will go by the wayside if you do happen to privatise something, and in that sense that is in monopoly position. And the other thing, there's been issues raised already by some of the larger logistics providers that rents have gone up in the privatised ports in Botany and in Brisbane, astronomically compared to what CPI or things like that. So, and you can't go anywhere else. That's the problem. So,
I guess the interesting contrast here is that this is something that is happening not just in Australia. New South Wales sold Port Botany and Port Kembla, and the Port of Brisbane was sold in 2010. You've got multiple examples of overseas ports being taken out of government hands and going into private hands. Why is it happening then? If
Look, I think I don't know if there's that many overseas, like even like closer by ports like Singapore. That's all owned by the Port of Singapore Authority, which is a they're corporate. They're not the full-on government organisation, but they're corporatised. So, but the Port of Melbourne and the Port of Brisbane, they were all corporatised as well. So there's already a semi-private enterprise. But I think what sort of started off here is that the Port of Brisbane was the first to go because the government was hard up for money, and with hindsight they probably sold it too cheap. It was only $2 billion, and they could have probably got a lot more of it. So the taxpayers lost out there, and it was all done. And now the Botany and Melbourne. There's a rumour about Melbourne being sold by both sides of government. It's all done to sort of say, oh well, we need the money to invest in other infrastructure, and what they call recycling capital into other infrastructure, and it's usually done in infrastructure that's popular, as you heard
roads, hospitals, schools are fairly important to people.
And, hospitals and schools and things like that, and I think that's a bit of a sort of a glib, politician speaking, saying, well, for popular, it's for popular things. So in Melbourne, the issues are, the Labor government says, if we get into power, we'll sell it and we'll fix up, 50 level crossings, on the train line, things like that. It's sort of a glib sort of thing to say, we need to sell this.
Peter, are you saying that the revenue that's made from selling an asset like the Port of Brisbane for $2 billion, which was under the Labor government, is not necessarily spent in the way that...
in that particular one went to consolidated revenue. In the case of Botany, there was an undertaking, say it was going to go to infrastructure, so like I think they've talked about the West Connex roadway, and like I just mentioned before, in the one for potential sale for the Port of Melbourne.
Yes, well, I guess
for other but there is, number one, there is. Interest rates are very low, so you could borrow that money at quite a reasonable rate, and then some of them say, then we'll lose our AAA credit rating, and but even that, it's a bit like the federal government saying, we've got critical issues, but whether that's all true or it's a bit of a statement that sort of fits in there in the political. In the political agenda.
Yes, and we should just be clear for people listening tonight, Peter, you have no political affiliations.
No, I'm completely independent.
Okay, you're listening to Peter Van-Duyn. He's a maritime specialist at Victoria University. Two brief questions just to finish on. Do you think there will be a lot of buyers in the market for the port of Gladstone and Townsville?
I think there will, and it's because of there's been quite a bit of interest for Botany, and there is interest for Melbourne as well. So
yes.
So I think there will be, whether that's justified or not, the time will tell. The multiples that what they say is 25 times price earnings, which seem to be a bit on the high side, but it just depends on how well they can project
yes.
growth.
Well, time will tell on a number of fronts because it's the Queensland people who need to decide in the first place if the sale should go ahead. All right, Peter, really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much.
That's all right, no problem, Rebecca.
Peter Van-Duyn, a maritime specialist at Victoria University. Love to hear from you tonight. Whether you're in Townsville or Gladstone, what do you make of your port being offered to someone as a 99-year lease, essentially the privatisation of your port? Give me a call tonight, 1300 222 612. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Tim Nicholls' third budget handed down today. I also want to get some analysis of what happens if electricity generators are sold, because you now know that CS Energy and Stanwell are up for sale. The government's inviting private investment in the electricity network. So how could those sales impact your power bill? Well, Stephen King is a professor of economics and co-director of the Business Policy Forum at Monash University. Evening, Stephen.
Hi, Rebecca.
Can you give us some examples of electricity privatisation and their impacts in other states?
Yeah, most of the Victorian system and the South Australian system have been privatised, and they've been privatised for years. The Victorian privatisations go back to the 1990s and the Jeff Kennett era. New South Wales is in the process of privatising some of its electricity assets at the moment, and of course, in one situation, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission is before the courts trying to prevent Macquarie Generation there being sold to AGL. So electricity privatisation is becoming the norm rather than the exception in Australia. So
what was the impact on power prices? Because that's the thing that everyone in Queensland wants to know. And at the moment, Queenslanders are facing a 13.6% price hike on electricity bills from July 1. Yep. So can we get an indication of power prices based on what's happened in Victoria, South Australia and New South Wales?
Yeah, to the first order, there'll be no change whatsoever. It won't matter whether they're private or public. Let me separate out between the networks and the generators just to explain that a bit. The generators that you've got in Queensland, so CS Energy and Stanwell, they're already competing against private generators. They're part of a national electricity market which runs all the way from down in Tasmania and South Australia all the way up the east coast of Australia and into Queensland and all the way up to Townsville and Cairns. So that's all part of one market, and when you turn on an electricity power point in Brisbane, you could be getting your electrons from Queensland generators that are publicly owned at the moment, or from New South Wales generators, which could be public or private, or from Victorian generators, which are all private. And you don't know, and the price is simply set by competition between those generators. So the change to the Queensland generators becoming privately owned, that'll have no effect whatsoever on the generation market.
Before you go on to the network, can I just... The Treasurer, Tim Nicholls, in what I called a rather unusual potential sales strategy earlier in the year, said, some of these assets are hurting the state government. In fact, CS Energy hasn't turned a profit since 2007, 2008. Are you surprised to hear that?
No.
And if so, who would buy that?
The financial performance of some of the state-owned generators leaves a bit to be desired, if I can put it that way. The one thing that we found in Victoria is that when the generators were sold to the private sector, the private sector was able to get efficiencies out of those generators to get costs down and to keep them running, where in the case of, for example, Hazelwood down here, the state government had been about to close it. Now, that's, more than 20 years ago, and Hazelwood is still running. If you ask the environmental movement, that's been a complete disaster because Hazelwood happens to be the most polluting power station in Australia. So I'm not necessarily saying it's a good thing it's kept going, but certainly if you're interested in low costs, then the private sector seems to achieve it.
Okay, I know maybe this is a question you can't answer, but can you make a prediction? If these electricity assets are sold, will Queenslanders' electricity bills long-term go up or down?
They won't go up any faster than they would otherwise, which is a wriggle room answer. There's there's a big problem facing the Australian electricity system, and it's not just the Queensland system, and it actually relates to the networks, in that you have public and private assets with these networks, and electricity demand is actually going down for power sent through the traditional wires. As we get more solar systems, particularly residential solar systems, the predictions that all of our engineering is based on, which is one of increasing demand forever, has shown to be wrong in the last 5 years.
That's because we've all learnt how to live more greenly, how to turn out the lights.
Yeah, and solar technology is coming along well, so it's becoming cheaper to rely less on the grid. Now, that's a big problem for parties who own these assets, both the government and the private sector, because these assets are becoming less valuable. As they become less valuable in the world of electricity, which is slightly different to every other world that you can think of, as less consumers want to use the network, the price goes up. And those prices are actually set by the Australian Energy Regulator. It doesn't matter if they're public or private assets. The Australian Energy Regulator treats those assets absolutely in the same way. So the privatisation will have no effect on Queensland's power bills, but do not expect your power bills to go down anytime soon.
Oh, I hate to end on a downer, but we have to. Appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Stephen King, he is a Professor of Economics and Co-Director of the Business Policy Forum at Monash University. 1300 222 612. Do you want the state government to sell assets? And a second question to you as well. Do you approve of the government spending $5.2 million to sell their plan to you? Give me a call.
On air, online and mobile.
ABC Local Radio Queensland.
Because it's been made very clear today that money will be spent because the government says this is the right thing to do by Queensland. What do you think, Therese in Mackay? Hello.
Hello. Thanks for taking my call. What I wanted to talk to you about, Rebecca, is there's a hidden cost behind all of this. When the government sells, say, off the lease for a port, what happens is there is an ovation of contracts that has stepped behind that. So there's an act of parliament that says that any contracts that are in place, like if people are doing maintenance for them or working for them as contractors, any of those contractors that are in place when that asset is sold, novate to the new owner. Nobody tells the contractors about that.
Okay, and what does that mean? That it rolls over to the new owner?
That's correct.
Yes.
So you could be working for the Ports Corporation or Electricity Commission or whatever, and you've been running a contract with them for millions of dollars to be done over an 8-month period or something, and you're into your 6th month, and you've been dealing with them on a contractual basis and getting your progress claims in and paid. And one day you put your progress claim in and they go, oh, I'm sorry, you don't send us to us anymore. You've got to send it off to the new owner.
But I mean, I understand what you're saying, but isn't that kind of life in the big business world? Things get sold, you've got to create new relationships. Is there necessarily an adverse effect on the
adverse effect on that can be that you're dealing with an ironclad contractor, ironclad company that you are prepared to go and deal with. You have no choice in the matter as to the company that takes it over.
Yes.
You may never have dealt with them because of the way of their own business relationship.
And Therese, are you speaking from a place of experience?
Very much so. Very much so. And there are large corporations who are actually in the same situation, that there are legal battles going on years after some of these have occurred.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's a big part of the story. Thank you for raising that tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Therese from Mackay, another consequence, as she sees, from experience from the sale of publicly owned assets. Ron is in Guru tonight. Hi, Ron.
G'day, Rebecca. How are you, mate?
Well, thank you. Tell me what you make of the budget today.
Oh, interesting. I'm not politically swayed either way, so my comments got nothing to do with that.
Okay.
2 points I'd like to raise, in particular with the Townsville port. It's always a concern when an asset like that, which is got a lot of industrial activities, goes into the hand of the private sphere when it's such an environmentally sensitive area.
Yes.
And the other point I just wanted to raise is it's quite possible that the sale of some of our assets could be beneficial to Queenslanders. However, it is very much dependent on the lease agreement that's drawn up. It's very important to get the detail right. Last thing we need, okay, a 99-year lease, that sounds long-term and great, but if the fine detail then allows the new owner to transfer or sell in a short period of time, what happens is you can get unscrupulous businesses run down the asset, and that's the last thing Queenslanders need, where they let the infrastructure go by minimising their spend on refurbishment and maintenance, running down the asset, making a quick buck, and then passing it on like a problem.
Okay.
That is an issue that we want to make sure is properly stitched.
Yep, point well made, Ron. Thanks for the call.
Yes.
Ron from Garoo. Jennifer is on the Gold Coast. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, how's it going?
Well, thank you. You're not giving the Treasurer a thumbs up.
No, I'm not, Rebecca, I'm not.
Why not?
I couldn't possibly. The guy is just so unethical, he's insane.
Well, hang on a second. The Treasurer, Tim Nicholls, went around the state and spoke to Queenslanders and invited their opinions. He said up front, these are the number of things that we are considering. He's announced in his budget today, these are the things that they're considering. And the government will be taking these ideas to an election. So basically they're telling you up front what they're going to do.
Yeah,
so let's steer clear of talking about the Treasurer. Tell me why you don't like the idea of asset sales.
The idea I don't like, first of all, the vote that was cast in Queensland was a funnel vote. It wasn't an open vote.
Well, hang on, Jennifer. I think you're not. I'm keen to hear from people on the ideas of the Treasurer tonight, who is in the position that he was voted into. So I'm going to give you one more option to tell me why you disagree with asset sales. I don't want it to be about politics or individuals.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll talk about asset sales. I agree with Therese that when a publicly owned asset is sold, the contractors that are assigned to those publicly owned assets are affected. And I actually believe that it should be made that the contracts be paid out completely prior to the sale of the asset.
Does that happen anywhere else in the world?
I don't care. It's an ethical thing to do. Because what will happen is, as Ron said from Garoo, turned around and said, you will have your unscrupulous businesses that will run the item down and then cut it up and sell it, a little bit like what happened with Ansett Airlines. So I don't agree with the asset sales. I think the minute you sell an asset, unless it's absolutely nothing left you can do, nothing at all, the minute you sell an asset is the day you start spending money on a regular basis.
Okay, Jennifer from the Gold Coast, I'll leave it there. Thank you. It's interesting that, given that there are sometimes very intense feelings that are aired on this program and others towards politicians about the work they do and how they do it, that still some people feel very strongly that they should be the ones managing assets. Just an interesting little irony in there. John is from Ayr. Hi, John.
G'day, how you going?
Well, thank you. Get the last word on this tonight.
Yeah, good. Listen, I've got 3 points to make, right? The politicians just give themselves a big pay rise. Okay, I haven't got a problem with that. But, geez, mate, they're being a bit mingy with the pensioner, eh? Where they can't find a few bob to support him. This railway line they're going to sell between Mount Isa and Townsville, mate, you look at the price of a bus ticket, what it's going to cost you to go from Townsville to Mount Isa when they get rid of that railway line. That's That's the poor people's only link to Townsville, mate.
Is the railway line necessarily going to be dumped, though?
It's on the market, mate. It's on the market to be sold.
It's on the market, but does that mean it won't be operational?
No, it'll go all right, mate. I seen this in 1998. I seen where that line was going to be privatised.
Okay. Well, and your third point?
The third point is, I'd like to know how much subsidy the Brisbane greater area sort of thing gets from the state government for their bus services and that there, and you compare that to how much subsidy the government puts in to a bus service and things like that for the wider rural areas like Mount Isa to Townsville sort of thing.
I can't.